this study. So let's jump in. I'm looking at week 1, the overview. So we're going to study the book of Isaiah. Isaiah is a prophet. His name means something. It means the Lord saves. And I don't think that can be understated, because Isaiah's book will ultimately be about the Lord saving. Saving us from what? Well, we'll get into that. But the end result of Isaiah's prophecy is that the Lord saves. Also, just a footnote my own here about Isaiah the prophet. What is a prophet? Sometimes people believe a prophet is someone who can predict the future. I think that's limited. I think sometimes the prophet can say something about the future, but that's certainly not all, not everything the prophet will say. I think, in short, the prophet is a truth teller, tells the truth. And sometimes it's hard to hear the truth. So at times the prophet will give us all, or give the people of God a difficult word. You are sinners, and here is how I can tell, or here's how the Lord can tell. And the prophet is someone who goes in between, often gets the word from God, and sometimes that can be a word of indictment. You are sinning, and the prophet will in turn relay that word to the people. And sometimes we don't want to hear that word, but it's what the word, what God has, the word that God has for us. So a prophet is a truth teller. And Isaiah in particular is bringing a word not just for Israel and Judah alone. Those would be the two kingdoms, and we'll get into that even today. But his word is not just for the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, but his message is for the whole world. And he will have something to say about universal salvation. And what that means is that God is not only bringing a Messiah for his elect people, but God is bringing us a servant Messiah for all nations, all peoples. And the Syrophoenician woman knew that much, right? So from yesterday, or the gospel on Sunday. So that is Isaiah's message. And I like too that Isaiah's message ultimately is centered around God and who God is, and God's actions for his people and the world. So now I want to give a sort of an overview of Isaiah, placing Isaiah in the larger story. I want to kind of give you some a biblical timeline, and I think that's important. I think that's important because it gives us the big picture of God's plan for salvation that ultimately arrives to us in Christ. So we remember these big moments in the overarching narrative. And I'm going to start with the Exodus. That is a big one. And so we'll remember that God's people were led out of Egypt, their slavery, into the wilderness for 40 years. And then it was Joshua, and that's Jesus's name, Yeshua, the one who saves. And Joshua would be the successor to Moses to lead the Israelites into the land of Canaan. And if you want to place that in history, chronologically, that's about 1400. Some date at 1406 BC, before Christ. So 1406 BC, the Israelites enter Canaan. And then they occupy the land for a good amount of time, for several centuries. And we'll remember back on June 6th, we started our summer sermon series on the kingship of Israel. And that was when the people of God, they had tried to govern themselves, or they were governing themselves through judges, these appointed judges. And you'll remember that then the people requested, let's have a king. We want a king. Can we have a king? And it seemed like a bad idea at first, but God says to Samuel, the last judge, let him have a king. And who was the first king? Saul. Right? Remember Saul. So Saul becomes king in 1050 BC. And his reign lasts from 1050 to 1010 BC. And then who becomes king? David, right? The shepherd boy in 1010. David becomes king, and his reign lasts for 40 years. There's that number popping up again, the number 40. So 1010 to 970, David is king. And so if you want to go back and hear those stories again, and our sermons on those stories, you can go back and listen to the services on YouTube and the sermons on YouTube. I enjoyed it, kind of getting back into those Old Testament stories. So David's reign lasts 1010 to 970, and then Solomon, his successor, takes the throne in 970, and Solomon's reign lasts for 40 years, 970 to 930 BC. And during that time, the temple is built. Okay, and that was David's dream. And Solomon, his successor, is the one to bring it about, the building of the temple. And construction projects take a while. So it's from 966 to 959. 966 to 959 is the period of the temple building. And then after Solomon's reign, the kingdom is then divided. So King Solomon had broken the command of the Torah by marrying foreign wives and taking on their ways by worshiping and building shrines to foreign gods. And so I'll cite this passage from the Bible, 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 9 through 13. And the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David, my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. So that's when we begin to see how the kingdom will be divided. And it is divided from that point on. Until we get to until we get to Isaiah's prophecy, and then other things come about. So 930 BC is when the kingdom divided, and so you have the northern kingdom, and that would be I'll go back a little bit too. There are 12 tribes that make up the nation of Israel, right? 12 tribes. And when they're divided, 10 go to the north and 2 go to the south. So in the southern kingdom of Judah, you have the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Okay. And in the northern kingdom, you have 10 of the 12. And also, I'll note it here. Where do we get the name Jews? From Judah. Okay. So that's where that name, how that name comes about. Jews come from Judah. So in the northern kingdom, you have the 10 tribes, and Isaiah will prophesy, and that is the verb for, so a prophet prophesies prophecy. So that's the word, prophesy. So Isaiah prophesies that this will happen. You people, not just Solomon, but had done this, but the people of God have turned away from their true God, and he will prophesy that there will be consequences to this. And what happens to the northern kingdom is that the Assyrians conquer the northern kingdom in 722 BC. So we're going through the chronology here. 722 is a key important date in our history, in the Judeo-Christian history. 722 BC, the Assyrians conquer the northern kingdom, but the southern kingdom remains intact. So you've got 2 tribes left making up the southern kingdom after that Assyrian conquest. Oh, and we should note that Jerusalem is in the southern kingdom. So the capital of Jerusalem and the temple that was built earlier in the 900s, the temple is located in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem remains the capital of the southern kingdom, Judah, and it's still intact, okay, after 722. But, and Isaiah will take up this history and prophesy, lean into it in a prophetic manner. The southern kingdom is also going to stray. And what happens is that the Babylonians in 586, they come in and conquer the southern kingdom of Judah. And in doing so, they destroy the temple in Jerusalem. And from my understanding, historically, the Assyrians, you have these world superpowers, right? So the Assyrians were kind of the big bad bully on the block earlier than the Babylonians, and the Assyrians, from what I understand, were ruthless. I mean, so they'd go in and they'd kill everybody and didn't really care for their victims. Like, I mean, I don't want to make the Babylonians sound sweet, but the Babylonians didn't kill everybody, but they put them in exile. So that's what happens. So the Assyrian conquest took place in 722, went in, conquered the northern kingdom. 586, the Babylonians were the big bad bully on the block then at that point in history, and they came in and they conquered the southern kingdom and destroyed the temple and did plenty of damage, and they were awful in their own right. But what they did is they took them hostage and exiled them east. And they physically relocated. They were exiled to Babylonia. The Jews were. Bart.
So you said the southern kingdom that Isaiah prophesied that the southern kingdoms will stray, or did they actually? I'm not sure I understand that.
And so they did, and he's telling the truth, as a prophet does, about that. You have strayed, and this is what's going to happen.
So what did they stray from?
Worshiping God.
Worshiping?
Yes, it's
Okay.
often it's idol worship and
Oh,
being the wrong God and worshiping false idols. And everything that comes with that. So Isaiah's gonna everything that comes with that, Barbara. So the Torah that is given to us by God teaches us a certain ethic, right? So like caring for the widow, for instance. Well, once you stray from worshiping the one true God of Israel and direct your attention to other gods, you're going to lose sight of what you ought to do, and you neglect the widow, and that's a perversion of justice, is God's justice. And so that we'll get into that. So, and you'll hear the prophet speak specifically to how the people of God have strayed. You've neglected the widow. You're not doing anything that our true God has asked of you, um, to preserve God's righteousness and be in a right relationship with Him. And in doing so, these are the consequences. This is what happens. This is what's going to happen to you. So, but all that sounds pretty despairing. And so Isaiah does, in the overview, touches on this, and that's important. So that's not the end. That's not the end of the story. So okay, so we've we've sinned. We haven't done what God has asked us to do. There are consequences to our sin. So what next? And Isaiah is going to prophesy that, well, God is going to send a Messiah. And the radical thing, and we'll get into this, the radical thing about Isaiah's prophecy and our faith is that this Messiah will actually take on the sin itself and the suffering that comes with sin, which is pretty radical. And Joe Bailey Wells does a really good job in her commentary on this. That's really different from any other understanding of messiahship. Really, he'll take, and we see that even in our own faith most radically, in that, I mean, Jesus takes on sin. He takes on the shame of the world. Um, so, but I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But I did want to speak to the hope that is offered by the prophet too. So, but to go back to sort of a chronology of events. So 586, they're put into Babylonian exile, and they're in exile. The Jews are in exile from 586 to 538. And then it's really, it's the Persians that allow so we've gone from Assyrians to Babylonians to Persians. And in 538, the Persians are involved and got with God's hand involved in all of this, we trust, providentially. The exiles are allowed back into the land of Canaan and return to their home, to their homeland. And that's when, then it's after 538 when another temple is built, and there are prophets that sort of the later minor prophets are speaking about that, prophesying about a new chapter in God's salvation history and a new temple. And there's a lot more into that too. I mean, there are some generations that saw both temples, and they're sort of saddened by the it's not the same. They're saddened to see that this second temple is not as glorious as the first temple. But I'm kind of getting more into the weeds. But anyway, but I think it's important. Okay. So hopefully that was helpful to kind of frame Isaiah, put Isaiah into the larger story, right? And And then, so now we can move to, and I'm just looking at my book study guide here, the outline here, a 7-point outline. And Barbara, you had a question about this? Didn't want to forget that.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure what to do with the outline.
I think what to do with it is just to keep it kind of available to us, so that when we're reading along, studying Isaiah, and say we're in chapter 8, then we say, okay, well, that chapter 8 and what I'm hearing and studying and reading in chapter 8, that falls within this sort of according to the outline. These are Isaiah's words when God is redefining the future of his people. So how is what we're studying in chapter 8 redefining the future of his people? And where are we going next? So I think it's just a way to frame the whole book of Isaiah. Okay, well, we have 10 minutes. So that's, let's work with some of these questions. What is your understanding of how Isaiah helps us to grasp the whole storyline of the Bible? Do you have an idea of how aspects of Isaiah's message are fulfilled in the New Testament? How about that first one? What is your understanding of how Isaiah helps us to grasp the whole storyline of the Bible? Barbara.
Is this too simple that he just shows us all the aspects of, or lets us know that it's coming God's judgment and salvation? Is that too simple?
No, I don't think so. Who else?
He shows us the sinfulness in the people, and how this can be so devastating. I mean, they lose their home, they become slaves again. And so it just shows, it's telling them, okay, you're not doing what God wants you to do. And also, but then he gives us the hope of the new Messiah, of someone coming to save. And it's just, that's how I feel. I mean, that's what I think he's saying.
Good. What about the second question? Do you have an idea of how aspects of Isaiah's message are fulfilled in the New Testament?
I mean, it's,
yeah, go
ahead. It's, that's what we, during Advent, you read, there's a lot of readings from Isaiah and Micah and whatever, and it's just reinforcing the fact that this is what he said. There will be someone coming to save us, or to take our sins away. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we do this every year. It's, every Advent, we begin with that, with those readings.
Right. Barbara.
This isn't mine. I read it in somewhere, because I did a lot of different readings that I found, but he was considered the prophet of the New Testament. Is that, that's a quote I took.
Oh, Isaiah?
Yeah.
Huh? Yes.
I mean, isn't it? I mean, if he's predicting that the Messiah is coming, and that through his not Isaiah's, but through Jesus's work, he fulfilled a lot of these prophecies. And so that he proved that he was the Messiah by fulfilling these. Now, that's not something I found that. That's not, those aren't my words, but is that on target?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Brother Bert,
Yes, Sandra.
I read in one of the study guides that the book of Isaiah is called the fifth gospel, for obvious reasons, because of the emphasis on the person and the coming of the Messiah.
Mm-hmm. Good. Good. Who else can respond to that? That's good. Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know the number offhand, but how often is Isaiah quoted in the Gospel of Matthew, for instance? I don't know. A lot. Kind of back to your point, Barbara, and you said something similar, Sandra. This is the New Testament prophet. So, okay, good. Let's go to, what is your current understanding of what Isaiah contributes to Christian theology? How does his book clarify our understanding of God, Jesus Christ, sin, salvation, the end times, or any other doctrine? Dave.
Yeah, I thought this question ought to come at the end of the book, at the end of the study, because I mean,
Sure.
I haven't read much. I mean, we know Isaiah, we hear it quoted, we hear passages and stuff, but I'm thinking we're going to be better able to answer these two questions at the end of 12 weeks.
Good. We'll come back to it. That's good. Let's hold on to that question. Then I want to jump to the third then and maybe kind of rephrase even what aspects of the prophecy of Isaiah have confused you? What I'd ask, what aspects of the prophecy of Isaiah do you want to know more about? You have questions about certain aspects of the prophecy of Isaiah. What are those questions?
Maybe when I was reading the book, it's, the book itself, he starts, but he talks, he puts Judah as the female figure. and he just, he goes on and goes on and just, I don't know. It was, he uses it as a female person, the whore, the so-and-so, and on and on and on. And I don't know. Country, why in the feminine aspect of it?
Okay.
That's my and I know I don't know why. I mean, but
Yes, sure.
rubbed me the wrong way.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to answer that today. I think I could try, but I'm not going to. I think at this point, I'm sort of taking inventory on questions. And I think I wrote it down. I'm going to write that down and let's give it a little bit more attention in the future. So why in the feminine? Why does the prophet speak of Judah as an unfaithful woman, really, so much? Okay. Any other questions you have about Isaiah and his prophecy? Carter.
Not the prophecy so much, but you've given us a timeline around this. When was he born and when did he start his prophetic writings and so on?
Sure. He began in 740 BC. I don't know. I don't know his exact birth date, but that's okay, right? I think, but we want to locate him in terms of this timeline, and particularly before the Assyrian conquest. And so he's prophesying about 20 years before the conquest. He begins to prophesy about 20 years before the conquest. Okay. Any other questions? I'm sure more will come about as we kind of get into it, right? So this was just, again, an overview. So I'm looking forward to this. And so week 2, next week, let's take up week 2, confrontation and hope for God's people. And let me know if you are unable to get a copy of this study. I can either help you find it, or if you need it, I can make a copy of it and scan it and send it to you. But hopefully you'll get a copy, or if you don't already have one, and hopefully you'll get a copy, and we can dig into week 2 next week. This is gonna be really good. And my plan too is that we'll do this for 12 weeks, and then that will actually, believe it or not, take us close to Advent, and then do something advantageous. Ha ha. Ha
Father
ha.
Bert.
Yes,
what?
Dave.
Oh God, no. Right. Okay. I get it. Sorry. I just want to give everybody a heads up. I read the first 5 chapters of Isaiah and looked at chapter 2, and this isn't going to be easy, folks. There's a lot of work in this. I mean, a lot of questions to answer, a lot of thinking to do. So I'm going to have to give this some time. It's not something I'm going to be able to do Tuesday morning. So just a heads up.
All right. Okay. Well, bless you all. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon. Go in peace.
Go in peace and get Beth back on here.
Okay, I will.